What a Grand Prix and what an event in Austin. It was a brilliant return to the USA for Formula 1 with 140,000 fans in the grandstands on Sunday. This weekend had it all, with the suspension trickery from Mercedes emerging on Friday, to then the Red Bulls coming back fighting in qualifying with an awesome chase between the top two on Sunday in the closing laps of the Grand Prix. There's a lot to talk about here, so here's my 5 things we learned from the US Grand Prix. My name's Andy, and this is Behind the Drive. 2-stop races are the best kind of races. First up, it's got to be a green box for races with 2-stop strategies. I'm such a fan of races where the tyre wear is higher and strategy starts to play a bigger factor. So often we see races where the optimal strategy is just a single stop, with the hard compound tyre barely playing a part. But this is where the abrasive and undulating surface at COTA, combined with the high-speed directional changes through Sector 1, has played such a crucial factor in this Grand Prix. With 2 stops, there's always a crescendo at the end of the race, and it's exactly what we've seen today between Verstappen and Hamilton. We saw similar races in France and Spain earlier this year, where there was high tyre degradation and a fine line between the 1 or 2 stop strategies. In Austin, we saw a big difference between the front two. Red Bull pulled the trigger early on the first stop after Hamilton got past Verstappen into turn 1. And that differential only increased as Verstappen and Red Bull pulled the trigger early again, as he stopped for a second time 9 laps before Lewis Hamilton did. And in the end, it was close between the two drivers as Hamilton was chasing Verstappen down, with the gap ending up being just half a second across the finish line. In the end, it never even got to a point where Hamilton could try and make a move as he struggled to close the gap in the dirty air, but the difference in strategy was all we needed to make this Grand Prix a super exciting one. This track is a brilliant example of a circuit that doesn't necessarily have great overtaking opportunities, but is well and truly a spectacle, with the sweeping fast corners in Sector 1 combined with the long back straight into a heavy braking zone, adding in the high tyre degradation, and it's a race that I'm always looking forward to. Ferrari versus McLaren is heating up. On Saturday, it was 2x2 after the first Q3 qualifying runs, and it was the Ferraris that were the third fastest cars ahead of the 2 McLarens. Come Sunday, lap 1 was a 4-way battle between the drivers, with them all coming together into turn 12 at the end of the back straight. The soft tyres were not the ones that Sainz would have wanted, but he did well to ensure they lasted as long as the medium tyres of Lando Norris and Daniel Ricciardo, which turned out to be particularly helpful, as he'd only lost 1 position in the opening stint, despite not being too optimistic about his starting tyre before the lights went out. Meanwhile, Charles Leclerc put in a very strong performance from start to finish, as he ended up 4th with more than a 20-second margin to Daniel Ricciardo behind him. It was a great display from the Monegasque driver, and he did the job on Saturday to ensure he was in the best possible finishing position come Sunday. He was even just under 10 seconds behind Perez at the checkered flag, which is really impressive in a Ferrari car that was certainly not as fast as that Red Bull. This weekend, the Ferraris have been ahead of the McLarens in all of the sessions, but with just 5 races to go, the gap between the two teams is just 3.5 points, with McLaren just clinging on to the lead in that battle. It'll be all about which tracks play into the hands of each team as to who will end up on top at the end of the season in Abu Dhabi, but it's got to be a green box for what's an awesome battle between these two teams. Before I get into the next box, I want to take a moment to ask you to consider subscribing to Behind the Drive. We've recently hit 20,000 subscribers, and it would be great to hit 25,000 before the end of the season. A Max Verstappen Masterclass. I think I can't ignore just how good that drive was from Verstappen today. The Red Bull driver lost a position off the line as Hamilton got the better getaway, but he remained calm throughout and went with the undercut strategy from his team, which ultimately won him the Grand Prix. And it's obviously a green box for the Dutchman. He's well and truly operating on another level alongside Hamilton at the front in this championship, and today he drove incredibly well to control it from the front. He was even in a position where he encouraged the team to get Perez to pit and add the pressure onto Hamilton to stop earlier at the end of that first stint, which is exactly what the team did. Somehow, it seems like he was able to make the strategy calls for his teammate whilst racing at full pace through his second stint. Once the Red Bull team went for the second stop on lap 29, there was a doubt over whether he'd be able to keep Hamilton behind, but he controlled his tyres and managed the backmarker traffic so well to ensure he ended up increasing his lead in the championship to 12 points at the checkered flag. So many people, including Christian Horner, thought that he wouldn't be able to hold on to those tyres at the end, but Verstappen was there to prove us wrong after he'd looked after the tyres well and ensured he had enough just to manage the pace at the end of the Grand Prix. And then to top it off this weekend, Verstappen's teammate, Sergio Perez, has done a brilliant job to keep himself in the hunt. So many times this season he struggled to keep the pace in qualifying, but he was there today and delivered another podium for the team. But even though he was doing well, he still ended up 42 seconds behind Max Verstappen at the checkered flag. And that just goes to show how well Verstappen has done this year. Bottas's struggles return. Valtteri Bottas looked like he was starting to turn his season around, with strong performances in Monza and Turkey, with a little bit of luck in Russia. But this race has been another blot on his record. He took another new internal combustion engine with a 5-place grid drop to go with it. But this weekend was another instance of Bottas failing to make his way through the field, ending up 6th. And for that performance, for me, he's deserving of a red box today. He qualified well, and had he not taken the grid drop, he may well have been there to offer some support to Lewis Hamilton at the front. But his race today was just a bit disappointing. He lost positions in the early stages, ending up behind both Tsunoda and Gasly in the AlphaTauris. And let's face it, those are some of the last cars that Bottas can afford to drop behind. Tsunoda in particular is starting to become known for his defensive driving, where he gets his elbows out and keeps his car in the right position on track. The Japanese driver has had a tough rookie season, but is now for the second race in a row impressed with his ability to hold up the Mercedes cars and defend from them during those 2 Grand Prix. But for Bottas, this simply isn't good enough. I appreciate it's difficult to overtake at Kota without a significant tyre differential, but either way, in a Mercedes, he shouldn't be dropping back at the start. But instead he should have been able to take advantage of his superior car and make up some early positions. This is the key difference between Hamilton and Bottas, and just why Lewis is so much stronger when carving his way through the field. In the end, the Mercedes driver ended up 6th, only overtaking one of the McLaren cars and one of the Ferrari cars. So a really disappointing display, and a drive that offered nothing to ruffle the feathers of the Red Bull cars ahead of him. Bottas will have an advantage in the final 5 races, given he has taken 3 new combustion engines this season. So he has more in his engine pool than any other driver, but unless he takes advantage of this additional power in the qualifying sessions, he isn't going to get the results, unless he finds a way to start making his way through the midfield cars. Alonso pushes the boundaries. The final box this week is going to be an amber box for Fernando Alonso, after he really got his elbows out in this Grand Prix. Over the last few races, we've seen Alonso push the boundaries. With his choice to take the runoff in Sochi through turn 2, it shows how he's keen to test every avenue to give the stewards a headache. In Austin, he got his elbows out when racing Kimi Raikkonen into turn 1, as he pushed the Finnish driver out wide before the Alfa Romeo took the position into turn 2. It was a feisty exchange with debris being thrown up into the air as the two came close together, and it was Alonso and Alpine who were both fuming on the radio as Raikkonen went off into the distance. But the only reason Raikkonen was off the track was because he pushed him out wide in the first place and opened his steering through the exit of that corner. Meanwhile, the Alpine team were on the radio to Michael Massey, commenting on the fact that Raikkonen took an advantage by going off the track. What followed for Alonso, though, was an exchange with Raikkonen's teammate, Antonio Giovinazzi, a driver who's fighting for his position on the grid for 2022. Alonso made a dive bomb move down into turn 12, and then obviously ended up missing the apex entirely as he simply braked too late. He then took the position back from Giovinazzi into turn 13, in what was never going to be a legal move. It took him and the stewards a couple of laps to give that position back, with the threat of a 5-second penalty looming. Now, I don't mind elbows out driving. I've already mentioned in this video how Tsunoda's elbows out defending is absolutely brilliant, and I'm always up for close fighting on track. But some of these moves from Alonso were simply not legal, and in terms of that dive bomb, just outright dangerous. I appreciate that Fernando Alonso is keen to prove himself, but that's not the way to do it when you're fighting in a midfield pack. This weekend he took a grid drop for an engine penalty, and so it was always going to be unlikely that he would make it back into the points anyway. So to fight that hard for what was not even a points paying position seemed a bit excessive to me. Honourable mentions. First up for honourable mentions, I've got Charles Leclerc, who could have easily had his own green box this weekend, and Yuki Tsunoda, who also brought home a hard-fought and well-deserved 2 points for 9th position. Another mention has got to go to Perez, who managed his race without his drink system. He really seems to be finding his feet with that car at a crucial time, with his second podium in a row, and the Mexican Grand Prix up next. And then I think Sebastian Vettel deserves a shout out for what was a drive from the back of the grid with an engine penalty to 10th place at the finish. very solid from the Aston Martin driver. So it was a brilliant Grand Prix once again, and we've seen another battle between Hamilton and Verstappen. The gap between them in the championship has started to widen, but we still have 5 races to go in this championship, so who knows who will end up on top.